Celia Martinez, professor at the Department of History of Art at the University of Granada and also at the University of Sevilla, member of the board of ICOMOS Spain and ICOMOS Global. She's vice chair of ICOMOS International Scientific Committee on Cultural Tourism, and she coordinated ICOMOS International Charter for Cultural Heritage Tourism, finished 1 year ago, and she will talk about sustainable heritage tourism. Ladies and gentlemen, let us be inspired by Celia Martinez.
Hi, good morning everyone. Before starting, I would really like to thank all the organizers of this conference for having invited me to be here. It's beautiful to be in this amazing city, and it's beautiful to talk in such a nice room and with such a big audience. I'm really, really honored to be here and really happy to be here. So today, I will talk about the ICOMOS International Charter for Cultural Heritage Tourism 2022, and I will focus especially in the principles and aspirations of this charter for a responsible, fair, and more balanced tourism. I'm very glad to present the charter also this morning because yesterday night I did realize that today is exactly 1 year since we adopted the charter in the ICOMOS General Assembly in Bangkok. So it's really, really a pleasure to deal on this this morning. What I will do today is introducing a little bit the items or the questions that have made us to make this charter, and then we will focus on some of its principles. And I will start doing something that I really hate, which is providing some economic data about cultural tourism and cultural heritage. And I say I really hate doing so because I always claim that tourism is not a question of money, it's a question of quality, it's a question of happiness, it's a question of feeling alive and knowing all the places and knowing all the people. But we cannot ignore the economic dimension of tourism, of cultural heritage, and how do they relate themselves. So, starting with data, we know that according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the travel and the tourism sector play a very significant role in the global economy. It contributes 2.8 billion to the GDP in 2018 and generated $8.8 trillion always, including its indirect and induced effects, which are those greater, as we know. Cultural tourism is the 40% of those data, and if we focus in Europe, we also know that the 40% of European visitors choose their destinations according to their cultural offer. It is not therefore surprising that also cultural tourists spend more money. We know that they spend more money than other kind of tourists, and they stay longer in the places. All of this has, of course, highlighted the economic dimension of cultural heritage, not only as a strategic resource for its economic impact, but also because of its role in creating and enhancing, of course, social capital. However, this economic dimension of cultural heritage has, of course, a dark side, and that dark side, very dark, is of course, it's unfair and very unsustainable sometimes exploitation and vandalization. ICOMOS has always been very conscious of tourism's deep influence and positive and negative effects on cultural heritage. And precisely because of this, it established its ICOMOS International Scientific Committee on Cultural Tourism very early in 1979. ICOMOS itself was created in 1965, so we were dealing with cultural tourism effects on cultural heritage very early. Today, this committee is made of 204 members. We come from 62 countries around the world. We have very different backgrounds. I'm an art historian, but we have also people from the tourism industry, conservators, and a lot of people. So what we do is providing a forum for interdisciplinary and multi-stakeholder research and dialogue on heritage conservation and on cultural tourism. We also cooperate and provide technical assessment with partner international organizations, among which the UNESCO itself, the World Heritage Tourism Cities Organization, the UNWTO, and others. But ICOMOS is mainly known because of its advisory role to the World Heritage Committee. ICOMOS assesses and monitors cultural heritage world properties, and in doing so, ICOMOS has always been dealing with cultural tourism, because tourism is one of the most important items that you have to deal when you manage heritage sites. But if we look at the operational guidelines for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention, we do realize that these guidelines only dealt with tourism seriously, profoundly, very recently, from 2010 version actually, and probably also because of this reason, ICOMOS made its cultural tourism charter regulations also very soon. First charter was in 1976, and it was a very pioneer document, also a very early one, putting the relationships between tourism and heritage. It was also the first ICOMOS charter ever. Then we had the 1999 charter, and then we have the 2022, on which I will focus now. The reasons behind the new charter are that in the last 20 years, even if many of the 1999 principles are still valid, but the question is that in the 20 last years, as we were seeing in the previous presentation, there have been many global threats which affect both aspects. Mainly, heritage sites have been very intensively used as part of entertainment, as part of travel for everyone, not for only cultural elites as it used. And this has provoked mass tourism. It has provoked the degradation, the overcrowding of some heritage sites, their vandalization and gentrification, of course, failures of management, very, very deep social, ethical, cultural, environmental, and economic issues, and tourism right-based issues relating to displacement, unemployment, vulnerability, and lack of benefit share. And if we add to this the climate change, the environmental degradation, natural disasters, conflicts, and of course, the dramatic effects of COVID-19 on our lives, but of course also in the sector, and especially in very dependent tourism communities, well, we found that there were a big opportunity and an urgent need to reshape tourism, and that was behind the ICOMOS International Charter for Cultural Heritage Tourism that I started. I had the pleasure and the privilege to coordinate between 2017 and 2022. The main pillar of the Charter is that there's a need to recalibrate the perpetual economic growth-based approach to tourism by recognizing, mitigating, remediating its unsustainable and unfair aspects, as those that I commented before, and by reconceptualizing cultural tourism not as a solely economic activity, but mainly as a tool for ensure heritage access. Heritage access is a human right. The human right is the access of culture, but of course cultural heritage is part of a very important one of culture, and also as a tool to ensure heritage protection and enjoyment and people well-being, generally speaking. And all this within the theory of commons framework, which consider cultural properties not as private assets that can be enjoyed for a few or economically exploited by a few, but that pertain to everyone and that are of a common nature and a common responsibility too. We have framed this objective into several principles which address global cross-cutting issues, like place cultural heritage protection and conservation at the center of responsible cultural tourism, manage tourism at cultural heritage places through management plans informed by carrying capacity and other planning instruments, enhance public awareness and visitor experience through sensitive interpretation and presentation, recognize and reinforce the rights of communities, indigenous peoples and traditional owners through the participatory governance of the heritage commons used in tourism, raise awareness and reinforce cooperation for heritage conservation among all tourism stakeholders, increase the resilience of communities and cultural heritage through capacity development, risk assessment, strategic planning, and adaptive management, and integrate climate action and sustainability measures in the management of cultural tourism and cultural heritage. I cannot, of course, delve into those principles, so we will focus this morning in 3 of them. Principle 2 is a very important one because it aims to manage tourism at cultural heritage places through management plans informed by carrying capacity. Of course, the responsible management of tourism, it does require the monitoring of impacts on the natural and cultural values of sites, but also in the well-being of host communities and of visitors themselves. So every management strategy of tourism and of visitors needs, of course, to monitor those impacts. And for doing so, we need to consider the indicators of the several dimensions of carrying capacity, which is, of course, is physical, it's ecological, it's social, it's cultural, and it's also economical. And of course, it does include the quality of the visitor experience itself. If we manage and if we monitor indicators, is to do something with them. It's not only to show that we are doing so, but to have specific actions. So this need to orientate the options for management of the sites. Maybe we need to limit group size, maybe we need to close sensitive areas, or maybe on the contrary, we need to open in hours or zone compatible activities. The follow of indicators will help us to assess that in a scientific and clear way. I have bring you a nice example of the use of carrying capacity application, an example that I know well because it's in my own city, in Granada, and is its use in the Alhambra and Generalife World Heritage Site, which is a very good example of tourism deep influence on cultural heritage and on conservation and appreciation of heritage itself. The place is very interesting because the Alhambra became a symbol and an obsession for romantic tourists in the 19th century, and it was precisely tourism that helped very much to preserve the site and to declare it as an historic monument as early as 1870. But it also prompted what they call, and is terrifying, is ornamental restoration. Imagine what does it mean? It means doing the place even more exotic than it was, because of course the place was great for European tourists that were looking for exotism, but they didn't need to go to very dangerous India or Iraq or whatever at those times. They could stay in Europe and have all this exotic. So the place was very, very transformed to allow more and more tourism in the 60s and the 70s as well, allowing traffic, construction of hotels around the monument and everything. And it arrived to a situation very unsustainable. So in the 90s, the place was instead an example of the use of carrying capacity indicators to guide management, and it had a very positive overall effect in the city, more spread tourism, more overnights. Today, however, we are reaching again the limit of the carrying capacity of the place, so we need to be careful. And a principle very important to be careful is precisely the principle 4 of the Charter, which aims to absolutely have a responsible tourism, and recognizing and reinforcing the human, collective, community and indigenous rights which are embedded in cultural and natural heritage commons. Responsible tourism must also, of course, avoid any kind of heritage exploitation. It has to provide inclusive involvement and access to economic opportunities, to decent employment, and to recreation and enjoyment. We need to go beyond stakeholders' consultation to really ensure a participatory governance and benefit share, and we need to ensure gender equality and inclusion of traditional owners, minorities, and even disadvantaged groups in the management of cultural heritage. A nice example of participatory governance, we can find it, for example, in the Christianfeld in Denmark, also another heritage site. It's a very interesting place because the town planning reflects the democratic organization of the Moravian Church with pioneering egalitarian philosophy. And for example, the architecture of the place, it has common welfare buildings, such as large communal houses for congregation widows and for unmarried men and women. But the interesting thing is that the management plan is coherent, is consistent with these values, and for example, citizens have the right to comment on the cyclical revisions of the plan. The minutes of management meetings are made public. I'm amazed about that. I will never find so in my own place. Several groups are involved and are represented in the site management and governance, and there is a Christianfeld Center which provides cultural heritage information both for visitors and for locals. Finally, our 7th principle is probably one of the most ambitious and difficult to achieve one. It aims to integrate climate action in the management of cultural tourism and cultural heritage. Of course, climate action calls for a transformative change and regenerative approaches to cultural tourism. It is a personal, collective, and professional responsibility, so all of us, all tourism stakeholders must contribute to mitigate, reduce, and manage climate impacts. We should consider local ownership, knowledge, and practices in climate action, and we need to raise awareness about the consequences of climate impacts for cultural heritage and for communities. Climate impacts are not only for the environment, but also for cultural heritage. For example, in the interpretation of the sites should already include messages on this item, which is still to do. In the case of the Principle 7, I haven't bring any specific example. I will rather invite you to have a look at the documents that UNESCO, ICOMOS, and other advisory bodies are doing in this regard, and to have a look also to the Climate Heritage Network with a lot of activities and proposals in this regard, which we really need to take into account. So time is running out. So to conclude, I would like to tell you about how we are applying the Charter principles right now. I'm very happy to say that at this moment, those principles has been guided very important programs and initiatives. For example, the Cultural Tourism and Visitor Management Framework commissioned by the Organization of World Heritage Cities. We also collaborate with the UNESCO Visitor Management and Strategy Tool, the VMAST, which is available through the UNESCO World Heritage Sustainable Tourism Program. And we have already finished a very nice collaboration with the World Tourism Organization, the ONCE Foundation in Spain, and with the ICOMOS Committee on Cultural Tourism, on how to apply accessible tourism for all and the recommendations for, particularly for the key players in cultural tourism ecosystem. And to finalize, well, how is going to be the Charter future. What we would like for the Charter and for our work is, of course, to help, to assist in guiding the tourism management of cultural heritage sites and destination, complementing the operational guidelines for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention orientations on this aspect, through regional guidelines and specific programs, providing study tours, tourism assessment, professional and research activities, and policy development support, cooperating with international, national, and regional agencies and organizations. We are here for that purpose. We would like to continue supporting communities which are engaged with or seeking for a transformative, sustainable, fair, and responsible cultural tourism. And of course, bearing in mind something very important, that best practice is not at all a status, it is rather an ongoing commitment to anticipate, to adapt, and to improve practice. So thank you very much for your attention. My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Celia. And let me put you all back to work with your phones. Answer yes or no. The next question is coming up your way, so scan the code and look at the next question. Heritage objects should be presented in their original context. Heritage objects should be presented in their original context. Yes or no? Always very interesting to see this shifting.